what can we as marketers and educators learn from a guy who taught rats to press buttons for food? If you're interested, stay tuned to this episode. Tap into the psychology of engagement and more. This is where we talk about life, learning, and everything in between. This is the Lifelong Podcast, a show for those of you who love to ask why. It's because we're marketers. It's because we're coaches. It's because we're change makers. Each week, we dive into the big questions and explore the psychology of engagement with strategies, tactics, and special guests along the way. Now, here's your guide, the visibility hacking queen herself, Coach Molly. Hey, visibility hackers, and welcome back to this episode of the Lifelong Podcast, where we are diving in to psychology for marketers. We're going to learn from the greatest psychologists and the most interesting experiments that have gone through history, and we're going to learn why they're important and how they apply to us as marketers. I'm your host, Coach Molly from visibilityhacking.com, and it's an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, if you like what you hear, hey, consider giving us a 5-star rating. Give us a review. Maybe even share it with a friend. And if you're the adventurous type and you like to watch us on video format on the Three Pines Leadership YouTube page, then hey, drop us a thumbs up, subscribe. We'd love to keep in touch. So now, who are we talking about today? Today, we are talking about the work of B.F. Skinner. So we're now building on what we learned a few episodes ago when we were talking about Pavlov and his dogs. Remember Pavlov? He was talking about how if you train a dog to change the stimulus, right? You get the bell ringing, and then the dog is going to salivate the same way the dog would if there was a steak in front of them. And so you've been able to condition that response. Now we're going to move forward with behaviorism and go into the work of B.F. Skinner. And he was an American psychologist, and he was best known for his influence on behaviorism. So that's the idea that our behavior is what's most important. Skinner referred to his own philosophy as radical behaviorism, and he suggested that the concept of free will was simply an illusion. We're always just reacting to our environments. All human action, he insisted, he believed, was the direct result of conditioning. We are conditioned. Every response we have has been taught to us, has been learned behavior in some way. So he's known for a few different experiments. So one product that he made in his early career, because of his wife's asking, was this kind of glass crib that had vents so that children could get fresh air, where their glass crib was hung outside of a window. It's kind of freaky. But he later led to his most famous experiment, which is known as a Skinner box. It has nothing to do with being skinned, I promise. What it is it's a container, so like an experimental box, where there's a bar, or there's a key, or there's a button that could be pressed, where an animal could press on it in order to receive food, or water, or some form of reinforcement. And I've even seen versions of it that have a grid on the floor that's electric, so it gives a negative impulse, right? So this box allowed him to really understand how we could train an animal to do something in response and condition their behavior. So what he did was he trained these rats to press the button, to turn the key, to press the bar, whatever it was, in exchange for food. And he looked at the different responses. And he looked at what was most effective and impactful when it came to creating those behaviors that we want, those idealized behaviors. And what he found was what's known as operant conditioning. Operant conditioning. So operant refers to any behavior that acts on the environment and leads to a consequence. So if a button is pressed, food will be served. Or from a marketing perspective, if I follow the scenes framework, visibility and engagement will rise, right? If you do this action, this consequence will arise. Those consequences can be positive or negative. So this led then to Skinner talking about schedules of reinforcement. So these are predictable versus erratic. So if the mouse presses the button, the food will come. So if that happens on a regular basis, that becomes habitual. But what happens then if the rat touches the button and only every 3 times or every 30 times do we give that treat? Then what happens? That's how we test whether or not we've actually learned the behavior. We want to be able to have that behavior happen without having to reinforce it with a treat, right? That's ultimately what we want when we're trying to coach our clients through a process, for example. We want them to be able to do the process without us. We want it to become an automatic behavior for them. So what we need to do is think about, are we reinforcing the behavior we're trying to instill on a predictable basis or an unpredictable basis? What Skinner found was that if reward is erratic, then it leads to addictive and erratic behavior. Meaning the rats would just frantically be hitting the button or turning the key, just doing it. And it's not, it doesn't become a productive behavior. It becomes an erratic, addictive behavior. And that's not good either. That means in terms of what that looks like when it comes to engagement, when it comes to building our communities, when it comes to actually teaching and imparting a skill into our communities and into our people, if we're erratic or if we create erratic behavior in them, that means they're not showing up. It doesn't mean they're frantically pressing the like button on everything you're doing and they're frantically engaging. It's quite the opposite. They erratically will show up, meaning they might show up once in a while for the first few months before they completely ghost you. And we don't want that. We want our people to bond with us. We want them to stay with us. We want them to listen to us. We want them to follow us. But ultimately, we also want to give them the skills they need to be successful in whatever it is we're trying to help them with. And we can't do that if we're hovering them all the time, right? So let's think about ways that we can build frameworks and pathways that help our people succeed. So my suggestion to you guys is to create predictable points of reinforcement. So, for example, if you're building out a program, I suggest on a regular basis having a graduation ceremony where your people will come back. Hey, why not also look at ways that you can celebrate your people when you do online type learning, keeping in mind your asynchronous and your synchronous learners, looking for opportunities for blended learning. These are places where you can reinforce the behavior that you're looking for. Create predictable schedules. Don't change your meeting times last minute. Keep things predictable, schedulable, so that they become habits. They become habitual. When things become habits, there's a difference in what's happening in our brains. Where that information is being processed actually changes. When we're learning a new skill, when we're actively engaged in the process of learning, what we're doing is moving all this information around the big part of our brain, the neocortex, the thing that separates us from all the other animals. We get to think. But then the magic happens when that information flows down and settles down into the older parts of our brain, where our habits sit. They're things that can happen more automatically, where we can devote that thinking part of our brain to tasks that are moving us forward. We want our programs and our frameworks that we're teaching our people to settle into that habitual space so that they become automatic and regular ways for your people to be thinking. In other words, what we're doing is completely changing their frame of reference. What we're doing is giving them a different paradigm, a different set of lenses in which to see the world. So if we go back to the scenes framework, for example, the scenes framework is a way of looking at video content that's highly engaging and community developing and breaking it down so that we can apply it to our own programs and our own products and our own environments. So looking at that framework, it becomes so regular to my students that at first they're writing it down on a sheet and following it step by step with cued questions to help them make sure that they're looking at it the right way. And then at the end of the program, it's become habit to them that they do it automatically when they look at any kind of video content out there. They automatically are able to identify these important parts of the framework. That way, they're able to devote that thinking brain and that growth potential towards another area of their business, to growing in a different way, to learning and acquiring a new skill. That is the secret to not only improving in your business, growing your community, but also personal and self-development at the same time. Like, absolutely incredible. So that's what I have to say today, and that's what we have to learn today from B.F. Skinner and the idea that we can actually condition behavior in our people. It's pretty awesome. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you share it with a friend or a teammate who you think would get some value out of it as well. I'm Coach Molly from visibilityhacking.com. I can't wait to see you in our next episode. Until then, remember I love you. Be excellent to each other.